Welcome to Constant Variables, a podcast where we take a non-technical look at building and growing digital products. I'm Tim Bornholt. Let's get nerdy. A quick note before jumping into this week's episode, we at the Jed Mahonis Group have a lot of fun projects coming in the door, and as a result, we're looking to expand our team by bringing on some iOS and Android developers. We at JMG place an emphasis on hiring for fit as opposed to skills. Skills are something that can be taught and fostered through mentorship and experience, which is something we talk about on today's episode. Fit, on the other hand, is a lot harder to define, but we've outlined some of the traits we're looking for on our careers page at jmg.mn/careers. So whether you have a year of experience or 20 years of experience, if you're interested in talking with us, please reach out at careers@jmg.mn. We'll put that link and a link to the careers page in our show notes as well. Today we are chatting with Yash Khandor, engineering manager at Mark43, a company name you might recognize from an earlier episode, which we'll link to in the show notes. Yash serves as a mentor to aspiring engineers by sharing the non-tangible aspects of the journey. He particularly likes to inspire people who are looking to switch careers, but maybe feel they don't have the technical chops to land the job they want. So without further ado, here is my interview with Yash Khandor. Yash, welcome to the show.
Hey, hi, Tim. Thank you for having me.
I'm really excited you reached out so that we could have this conversation. I'd love for you to take a chance to introduce yourself and tell us all about what you do and what you're up to.
Absolutely. So like everybody knows now, my name is Yash Khandor. I currently work as an engineering manager for this company called Mark43. I'm currently based out of Toronto, Ontario. I'm also the founder and CEO for International Cricket Network ICN 360, which is a cricket game analysis and broadcasting corporation. I did my master's actually in the US from Carnegie Mellon University, specializing in mathematical modeling and optimization. Apart from my day job, I also serve as a career advisor and an engineering and leadership mentor. With regards to hobbies, I love playing the sport of cricket. Like I said, I also love playing table tennis, which I used to play professionally back in India. I enjoy mentoring, pro bono consulting, keeping up with the latest and greatest in technology, and most importantly, promoting diversity and inclusion. So that's broadly what I do. I can get into specifics of my role at Mark43 as and when we get to that conversation. But yeah, this is me in short.
I love it. I know you've just said, you've been all over with like corporate America, startup life. Where do you think you've learned the most? Do you prefer startups over corporate culture, or what? Do you have a preference one way or the other?
I wouldn't say that. I think you learn at every stage. It's just that the learnings are different. When you work in corporate America, you have different lessons that you learn. When you're in a startup culture, you learn different lessons. When you work for a startup versus own a startup, again, there are different lessons. I think the bottom line is you constantly learn. And as long as you accept that fact that you will always be learning and you will never be 100%, you should be good in life.
Yeah, I can agree with that. I think no matter what you do, as long as you put yourself in a position to learn, then you can learn different things. Like the stuff you can learn at a startup where you get to be in the role of making like tough decisions is, one thing. But then working in corporate America, sometimes you get to be in the role of getting to really focus on one niche and become an expert in one very specific field. So I think that's kind of a lesson I've learned too, is just as long as you're open to accepting whatever position you're in and owning that and doing it to its best potential, then that's probably going to result in a successful engagement with wherever you are.
Absolutely.
Is it true that you were offered a job by Apple that you decided not to move forward with?
Yeah, that's a fun story. Somehow you know it. But so basically I graduated from Carnegie Mellon in December 2014, and then I was looking for a job. I did land one previously, but then something happened with that company. I don't want to name them, but yeah, pretty big company, major company, but some org changed, so the hiring went on freeze. So then I moved to California to work for this startup there, but I was actually looking for something more concrete with all the visa issues surrounding international students. So while I was doing that, I had obviously interviewed with Apple and a bunch of other companies. But then Apple, after the final round, went cold on me for like 3, 4 months. And obviously, in the meantime, I found my other role of interest. And so I chose work, which is Raymond James Financial. So I chose working for Raymond James, moved to Tampa, Florida from California, started working there. And then 2 weeks into my job at Raymond James, it was just my second week. It wasn't even like complete 2 weeks done. I got a call from someone at Apple, probably like a third party contracting that Apple works with, because for international students, they sometimes hire you that way. So they said, okay, we have an offer for you from Apple. So when would you like to join? And I was like, I'm sorry, but I don't, I mean, I don't know if you know what my status is right now in the market, or even if I'm in the market. So yeah, that was how it was. But at that point, I had made peace with the fact that I really want to work for Raymond James. Because when I got Raymond James, I had a couple of other offers, but I chose Raymond James for a reason, for the role, the profile, the team, and the responsibilities that I had got there. So I kind of had planned like a few years down the line from that point with Raymond James in mind. So plus at that time when I was looking for a job, I wanted somebody to trust me with this. And that person at Raymond James did that for me. So I thought it's imperative that I stay there. So that's why I chose not to go with Apple. Nothing against Apple. I mean, it's a wonderful company to work with. I have a lot of friends actually who work there. So yeah, but that's the story.
It is very clearly to me a lesson in how not to hire software developers, and it's one of those things. I think the what's the old saying, like the hens are coming home to roost, or however that goes. I think that there's been so much weird recruiters, and the way that people get hired in this space has just gotten so ridiculous. And it's interesting when I work with, junior developers, for example, trying to get their first jobs, the process that you go through to get hired as a technical person is just nuts. Are there any like lessons or things that you think you can pick out of from that story with Apple, or just generally things of when you're either looking to hire somebody as a software developer, or if you are a developer and you're going through this craziness, like what are some lessons that companies can learn to make their process of bringing developers on board a little easier?
Absolutely. I think the most important lesson, that's something I implement in my day job as well. Now that I'm an engineering manager, obviously I'm involved actively with recruiting for my team and also for like other teams in the company. One thing that's very important is while the candidate needs the job, I mean, at the end of the day, the company needs the candidate as much or even more for that matter, right? So while we don't want to, as a company, probably don't want to show that you're desperate. I mean, you're never desperate, but you still really need a good candidate. So it's okay to make your interview stuff, but it's not okay to make the process stuff. The process has to be friendly. I think, especially with software development and just like the nature of software developers, it's important for them to feel in a space where, one, they have freedom of work, and secondly, I mean, they don't have to deal with an overhead of red tape or even like bureaucracy for that matter, right? So as long as we can make the process as a company for the interview process pretty straightforward, I think that should be the most important thing out there.
Yeah. And I think too, it's hard in the United States, especially. There's so many like fears of litigation, of if you're going to hire somebody and you tell them why you didn't hire them, that can open you up to some kind of class lawsuit, for discrimination or something like that. And it's hard because I think it just stinks being in the seat that we're in of actually hiring developers, because you want to give people feedback, especially juniors. You want to be able to say, look, you just don't have the right skill set for this. I need you to work on A, B, and C. But you sometimes feel like if you give that feedback, that's going to, and your HR people tell you this, like if you give that feedback, you're opening yourself up to a potential liability. And so more often than not, people instead go completely the other direction and say, well, I'm just not going to give you any feedback, and go silent. And we went through this whole interview process, and then we just don't talk to you for 4 months. And then in your case, someone reaches out and just says, all right, when do you want to start? And it's like, wait a minute, you just ghosted me for 4 months. like how does that help me? And so are there any advice or anything you could give for people like in that shoe of wanting to give feedback to developers, but do it in a way where they don't open themselves up to some kind of a lawsuit?
Yeah, definitely. So one thing that we do is we typically have like a standard template, right? If you don't want to go ahead with the candidate, there are reasons for it, obviously, or there are better candidates available or whatever. But we always have this open line of communication where if you want to get like a good feedback, you can reach out to the person who technically, like who interviewed you, right? For that matter, on LinkedIn or something, right? Now, that is not exactly official on the company for that matter, but we want to give like honest feedback, right, to you. So you can connect. And then potentially I have had situations where there are people who did not like qualify in that interview. They reached out, they asked for feedback. I gave them feedback. And eventually I turned out to be their mentor and helped them get a job somewhere eventually. So that I think that's where this entire interview process and the concept of interviewing should head towards. I know I would have loved to hire that candidate for my company, but I mean, they did not make the cut. They did not make the cut, right? It's pretty black and white. There is nothing to hide. It's very transparent. These are the metrics. Okay, you did not qualify for the metrics, but now what next? I think the biggest question that a lot of devs out there have is, okay, I did not qualify here, but why? What next? What should I do? Like people do courses all over the place. They read the books on cracking the coding interview, everything, but don't make the cut. So that's where I feel taking it to a level where people can reach out to you outside of the formal process, say on LinkedIn or something like that. I think that's beneficial for both.
Is there a way to give feedback? The way that you just mentioned it, you said that there's a good ways to give feedback from a professional standpoint, from like a technical coding standpoint of specific things you can work on, whether it's algorithms or MVC, whatever. Like just giving them feedback on that regard. But what about if it's like a culture thing? Like what if it's just there's something about the way like their demeanor, the way they acted in a maybe they were the ones being late to giving you feedback or something. Is there a way to give feedback on soft skills as opposed to like the hard skills?
Yeah, I think that's the trickiest one of the lot. Yeah, that is actually the trickiest one. While you're interviewing, the trickiest interview is the soft skills interview, and when you actually give feedback from like being an interviewer yourself, I think the most difficult one is the soft skills, because I mean, imagine going to somebody and say, oh, you know what, your attitude is not right for our company. I mean, that just doesn't sound right? Like that's not very friendly. So yeah, I think that's the tricky one. I don't really have like an exact answer for you on this one. I think we treat this on a very ad hoc and a case by case basis, depending on, again, right, like how far off is the candidate from your company culture. If it's way too far, I mean, it's very difficult to even, mention or negotiate those points. But sometimes when somebody is off by, say, a couple of values here and there, or maybe sometimes there is somebody else who is a much better culture fit, not that this person is essentially not a good culture fit. So in that scenario, it's much easier to convey the same. And again, like the line of communication, I think even for this still remains the same.
Yeah, it's really hard to critique someone's soft skills, like going up to them and saying, you're surly, or you're not a good communicator, like just things like that. It's sometimes hard, and especially sometimes you just get a gut feeling about somebody that you're just like, there's just something, I don't know what it is, but I can't. So yeah, it's really hard to find that though. And also it's, giving feedback on soft skills. That's some of the most personal, that's you're literally judging someone's personality in a lot of cases. And it's like, how, who are you to do that? But also at the same time, I think, there's a way that you can, give somebody feedback on personality things that might not mesh, so that at least they've gotten the feedback, and you don't have to be brutal about it and list
Absolutely.
off 20 things. It's a little different with like technical skills. Those are things you can really learn quickly, where things like soft skills, it's hard to be like, okay, go and work on smiling, or work on like being friendly, or work on like being a hard worker. Like it's hard to quantify that. So that's how I figured you'd answer it, is it's really ad hoc and you have to take it on a case by case basis. But finding a way to not trounce somebody's feelings can be difficult.
Oh, definitely. And I mean, sometimes when you're interviewing, right, you have to take the hard path of not being able to give the most honest feedback. I mean, sometimes some people can come across with an attitude that doesn't really match with your company culture. Not that that person is bad. I mean, obviously, the person has probably 15 years of experience in the industry or whatever, right? So they've been doing well in their life and in their careers. It's just that it doesn't match with your company. So it doesn't make sense to go up and tell them that, hey, you know what, you don't have the right attitude. I don't think that's the right way to go about it. It's just that, okay, unfortunately, it's not working out for us in this space right now. Maybe we can cross paths in the future, but I mean, you really don't want to burn any bridges in the industry. That's like the main thing, whether you're interviewing somebody or you're interviewing for somebody. I think as an interviewer and an interviewee, the most important thing is never to burn. I would never burn any bridges. This is a very small world. That's the last thing you want to do.
It's so true. Like, I mean, I can pretty much name the vast majority of developers and people working in the Minneapolis area, at least in software. And it's like, you and I are talking and we're a couple of states apart, right? We're a country apart. But it's still like, even just this, like us talking, there's, you meet all these people and especially given things like LinkedIn and other social media, the second that you find out you have a mutual connection and, I'm the interviewer and you're the interviewee, I'm going to go talk to those people and ask them, how's this person? What are they like? And so, yeah, if you have a reputation that's not great, that's going to follow you. So yeah, absolutely. Do not burn bridges. as good as it might feel in the moment, the internet doesn't forget, and the people whose bridge you just burnt will also not forget.
No, never. Yeah.
So, I mean, we talked about you jumping to the job that you took instead of Apple. And I mean, you clearly made the right decision because within 5 years, you went from a junior developer to an engineering manager. What would you say has led to your rapid career growth in just the last 5 years? And also, if you want to touch on where might you say you failed in those 5 years?
Sure. So to answer your first question, what's led to this fast growth? I think it was the ability. So when I chose this company over Apple, when I said that the responsibilities that I will get. So as a dev, when I join, a lot of times you're not aware, right? Like we join saying, okay, I'm going to work for a cool company and a cool product. But that's not about it always. You want to probably learn the entire stack. You want to get your hands dirty early in your career. I always say this, the age is 22 to 29 or even 24 to 29. This is your canvas. Like the way you paint it, that's how it's going to shape the landscape for you in the future. We try to be safe a lot of times in these years when you're mature and then you think, oh, you're better than a lot of other people who are doing the crazy stuff. But I think it's good to keep the canvas clean and just try to paint whatever you can in these 5-6 years. And so when I took up this job, I think I was able to touch while I focused on front end. So it's always good to have one niche because that's what defines you. That's what will never put you out of the industry or out of a job, even in times of recession, because that's your expertise. But along with that expertise, everything in the periphery of that expertise, if you're aware of it, and if you know how all of that works, it's very important because a lot of people talk about being full stack. I don't know how many real full stack developers actually exist. But I think what the industry expects from you as a full stack developer is an expertise in one part of the stack and a very good general understanding of the other parts of the stack. And I kind of was lucky enough to get this advice from one of my, here's my mentor, my manager, everything at Raymond James. I mean, I learned a lot from him, whether it's technology, whether it's career in technology, or whether it's even management. So I always attribute that to him. He's a very good friend of mine still. So with regards to that, I think that was what made the difference in me growing in the career in the last 5 years. I was exposed not just to front-end development, which is what I joined as a junior front-end developer, but also to some parts of the back-end, building APIs, understanding the database, also moving towards becoming a subject matter expert because I work for Raymond James Financial. It's a financial services company. So domain knowledge is equally important. When you delve deeper into domain knowledge, not all devs like to do it, to be honest. A lot of devs by nature are like, okay, all I care about is my code. I get things to work. That's my job. Now it's personal. There's nothing wrong in it. You can do that. But for me, I never felt complete when I did that. So I always like to understand the business. If I'm building something, if I'm building a UI for something, okay, what's the user thinking? Why does the user really want this functionality? That helps me design better. That helps me code better. And that's how I got very close to the product side of things as well. I had very good friends on the product team, on the business side. That's my core 5 years of work at Raymond James, where I did everything from project management to product management to development. Became a tech lead at a point, and that's when I realized that, oh, you know what, I really thrive in an environment where I want to club my technical acumen with the people management skills. And that's what brought me to this world of engineering management. So I worked for it, and then finally, luckily, I work as an engineering manager today at Mark43.
I really appreciate that feedback on getting deeper into domain knowledge, because I know as I've been growing in my career that you can tell the developers that are it's tough because you don't really have a lot of career growth if you're just interested in coding. I mean, you can go from a junior coder to a senior coder, and then you're just working on tougher problems. But until you actually get into the learning how the business works and how you can take your skill sets and translate it to solve people's problems, then you're just going to be a coder. You're not going to be able to like progress further in your career. So I think that's something really important to highlight is as a developer, you can't really be your best until you actually fully understand a problem. And you can't do that from behind a keyboard.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, I've seen people like excel in technical careers as well. I mean, they can end up being an architect. Again, like I think it comes down to what do you really want? Like, do you at any point want to be the face of the product or the face of the software that you're building? If that's the case, you need to understand the product. You need to get into people management. That's the only way to be the face of a product or a face of a project or the face of the software. But if you just care about building really high quality software, because we need both kind of people, right? Like if everybody wants to just be the face, you need somebody who's technically brilliant and just only cares about code and infrastructure. So those are the architects. I think these are all different parts of a huge puzzle that need to fit together and make it like a fine-tuned machine kind of thing. So I think you can do either. It depends on what you really want. So I remember you asked me, where did I fail, right? I think I did not answer that part. So while I'm saying this, I realized, so there are a lot of places I failed, to be honest. When I was doing front end initially, I didn't realize how fast the front end world changes. So I learned it the hard way that if you don't update yourself every 3 months, 6 months, you get outdated. So these are things you learn the hard way. I mean, people could have just told me that, but it's not always easy to, accept and understand what somebody's trying to tell you unless you experience it firsthand. It's bad on my part that I shouldn't have done that. I should have listened to people who have experienced, but it's just natural. You're in that phase, you're young, so things happen. But so that was one place I failed. The other place I would say I failed was realizing the importance of product, like I'm mentioning. I always liked product, but I never realized how important it would be in shaping my career. So I could have potentially realized it a year earlier, not that it would have changed my career path. Like I said, I'm lucky to be where I am today within the amount of time that I am. But it probably wouldn't have worked for everybody because I did lose on that 1 year, I would say. I should have probably realized it a year ago. But like I said, you learn it the hard way. And once you learn it the hard way, it never goes away. So.
Yeah, that lesson too of working in a team is one that I have really come to appreciate just in the last couple of years in my career, where I think especially young developers, everything does kind of ride on you, especially at the beginning, like if you're in a startup landscape, you are the one that's building this product. And if it's kind of like the ball's in your court, right? For the first few months and maybe a couple of years. But then eventually, once you get the product developed and it's out the door, then it's really not, the ball's out of your court. Like you need a team of marketers so people know about the product, a team of salespeople so that they can sell the product, and a CFO looking at the numbers. And like, there's just all these people where if you go in with a big ego and say that you're kind of, without you, this wouldn't exist. It's like, well, yeah, that's true. But but without all these other people, you wouldn't still continue to be employed and have new features to add and continue to build on top of it. So I think that's an astute point that you kind of need to see the whole world and also not just be kind of wrapped up in your own thing. It's understanding that there's other parts to the business that all have to work in concert in order to actually be successful.
100%. Just to add to that, like we speak about a lot of startups in the Bay Area. Like I was reading some statistics. While one startup opens up, two close in the Bay Area or something like that, some crazy statistics. The reason why all those startups fail and we don't hear about them, they're probably technically sound. They're probably one of the finest, like few of the finest developers out there in the world. But why do the startups not succeed? It's because the other parts of the puzzle don't fit in. The marketing is not there, the sales is not there, the strategy is not there. You never know. It comes down as, okay, a tech startup failed, but it's probably not the technology that failed them. Maybe it's the product that failed them. Maybe it's the marketing that failed them. So it's very important to understand that.
100%. And one other thing I wanted to highlight too was when you had mentioned that the way that you kind of act from 24 to 29 can shape the rest of your career. And I just want to also agree 100% with that. It's not to say like if you're in your 30s or 40s that you can't get into this space and you can't get going. I think it's really just the lessons you learn and the way that you decide to go from kind of in your teens and in your early 20s, you're still kind of in that collegiate world of, someone's kind of dictating a path for you to follow. And those first few years outside of those guardrails, the choices that you make of whether you're going to be focusing on something, whether you're going to be productive, whether you're going to build relationships and kind of dig roots and all of that stuff. It's I guess that maturing and that growing up process and figuring out your own path. And so I just want to say, like, I completely agreed with that. And that I think it's also important to note, like, if you didn't get into development when you're 24, or in my case, when I was 8, it doesn't mean that you're going to have a crappy career, that you can't figure out development. It just means you're going to have to put in a little bit of work to get caught up. But once you're here, Absolutely. I think that's a very good point you raised. So I actually want to clarify. When I said 22 or 24 to 29 is when you paint your canvas to shape the landscape of your future, I don't mean that you cannot if you're 32 or 35. So I'm all for this fact that irrespective of your background, irrespective of your age, irrespective of any external factors, it's up to you to get what you want. Just to give my example, I have a bachelor's in chemical engineering. I did my master's in mathematical modeling and optimization. I realized I want to build software for a financial company. So I entered the world of fintech. From there, I realized I learned a lot in fintech. I was like, I want to work for a product company now. So I got into this IoT, like an Internet of Things company, which built business mobility solutions. So worked with them for a year. And then I was exposed to this world of public safety software, which is very cool at Mark43. And now I'm working as an engineering manager here and not as a dev. Now, a lot of people might say that this is a very haphazard journey. But to be honest, there is a method to this madness. And I always tell people, you have to create the method to your own madness. People can think whatever they want to. A lot of successful people, right? At the end of the day, their stories sound like a perfect ending and a perfect storyline. But honestly, if you look at the intricate details, they've gone through everything, all sorts of things, before achieving the end goal. And when your end goal is good, your story always sounds good. So it's important to back yourself irrespective of what phase of life you are in, whether it's age, what background you come from. I think all of those things, they do matter. I'm not saying they don't. Then that's why I mentioned 24 to 29. That's much easier to take risks during these times rather than 35 to 40, probably when you have a family at stake. So obviously these factors do impact on your risk-taking ability and stuff like that, but it doesn't stop you from achieving anything. That's very well said. In your intro, you had mentioned that you love following technology and are constantly learning all the new stuff that's coming out there. How do you keep up with rapidly changing technology?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's like $1 million question. So it's probably the toughest thing to say that, okay, I'm 100% up to date. Nobody is 100% up to date. If somebody tells you that, they're probably lying for sure, or they don't, or they are not aware. But yeah, so I kind of try to achieve that. So I have subscriptions to certain tech journals that helps me know what's happening latest and greatest. And again, like, you potentially cannot know the entire spectrum of technology. You have to narrow down on, okay, what are your areas of interest? You need to know like the latest and greatest thing. For example, I am on the front, like I have an expertise on the front end and I enjoy front end. So yeah, I'm subscribed to these journals and conferences for, say, React, Angular, pure JavaScript stuff. And so I'm subscribed to these journals and I hear more from them. Now, that doesn't mean I don't know what's happening in the world of AI. I kind of read newspapers here and there, or news articles, or Medium articles here and there, the Dev Digest that I'm subscribed to. So these help me stay in the loop. I think the greatest way I've been able to stay latest and greatest with technology is networking. It's one of the most underrated things for being up to date with technology, but I think your network, the amount of diversity in terms of knowledge that your network has, if on LinkedIn, for example, right, I have folks from across the spectrum on my network. So when I'm going through my LinkedIn feed, I see everything from AI to technology to finance to equity research to world politics to front-end development. So that's how I kind of know what's happening everywhere. It's important to spend some time of your day to give yourself an ability to, just take a step back from your regular work, know what's happening around in the world. That way you're up to date with it. And then if you like something, if you're working on something that's latest and greatest, there is nothing better than being hands-on. That's probably the only way to know something up to date when it comes to technology specifically.
Yeah, I find it difficult, and I guess it doesn't really matter what industry you're in. Like pick web development, for example. There's like a new JavaScript framework that comes out every day, and it seems like things like we've got TypeScript now, and that's not brand new, but still relatively new. Where when I started programming, we just had like JavaScript version 1, and it was just like being able to do that kind of dynamic stuff. Like the Ajax hadn't even existed yet. So it's going from that world of just writing vanilla JavaScript to now having to know how to work within, frameworks like React and using, some type safe languages like TypeScript to kind of keep you in some guardrails and things like that. It's just, it is a never ending change and a never ending journey. And that's one thing that's hard to underscore when you're a junior developer is you think this like overwhelming tsunami of possibilities is like just, again, overwhelming, but it's never changing either. Like when you're in your career, you're never going to just be kind of do the dust your hands off and say, I'm done. That's never the case with technology. And it's, if that's not exciting to you, then I think you might struggle in this field. But that, I think a lot of people that really thrive in this field really thrive on the changingness and being able to kind of get deep in a framework for 5-10 years and then change to the next thing. And just it's usually natural progressions. It's very rarely, unless you kind of change jobs and kind of put yourself in a brand new position, it's very rarely where it's just abrupt stopped where, well, I guess we're not doing like Objective-C anymore. We're going to just do Swift. It very rarely is that. It's more of like, let's experiment with this Swift thing for a little bit. And then a couple of years go by and then, why don't we start this new project in Swift? And then you kind of keep going. And after a few years, it's, well, look at this old Objective-C code. Maybe we need to update that and convert it to Swift. And it's usually like that. I find is that how you see it too? Or do you see a lot of times in your career where you have to just all of a sudden stop and learn a brand new thing?
It's usually a general progression. I would say if there is a phase where, you have to suddenly stop and learn something new, that's usually when you slacked, to be honest. I mean, no corporate or no company is going to say, we are on Angular 1.x, for example, and now Angular 2 is out. Let's switch to Angular 2. That never happens. I mean, if it's difficult for you to switch, it's 10 times or 20 times or maybe even 50 times more difficult for an organization or an enterprise software to switch frameworks. So obviously that decision doesn't happen overnight. But if you feel that things are happening overnight, that's either like really bad planning on the organizational front, which is usually not the case. It's usually you who slacked and not kept up to date. And if that happens, I mean, you got to learn, right? I mean, we can complain all we want, especially in the web development or the front end space that, oh, Angular, I used to do that when I was a dev. Angular comes up with a new version every 6 months. It's crazy. And then, but it is what it is. What do? You wanted the new features. Yeah, you got the new features. So, I mean, I think one more point that's important here is there's so much to learn. You did mention the right word, overwhelmed, right? As a dev or a junior dev, you probably get like overwhelmed with all the technology that's out there. It's very important to define for yourself what you really want. I mean, even within a space that's as niche as a web development space or like a front end development space, there's a React, there's an Angular, there's Backbone, there are so many frameworks. Well, you need to determine at one point what framework you want to get into and then consolidate working on that. I mean, React and Angular are very different, to be honest. I worked with both, so I can say that they're very different. You can't say that, oh, I know both Angular and React, unless you've studied both. It's not that, okay, I've learned Angular so I can do React, or I've learned React so I can do Angular. No, it's not that straightforward. But what's important is that the underlying JavaScript fundamentals, which is the core of front-end development, is clear. Once that is clear, and if your computer science fundamentals are clear, you can even easily pick up TypeScript. If that is clear, you can pick up a framework. So it's very important to define for yourself and for the technology that you're working on what's really important. Frameworks will change, but the core language, the core fundamentals won't. So you need to be really good at your fundamentals. The frameworks can change and you can pick them up. So otherwise, it's just impossible. You'll always feel you are not up to date and you don't know so many things. It's very easy to get bogged down in this industry because of your 15 friends, 13 might be doing completely different things from what you're doing. That doesn't mean you don't know those 13. Well, it means you don't know those 13 things, but it doesn't mean that you have to know all those 13 things. Because potentially those 13 people don't know what you know. So it's important to know what you know very precisely and very strongly, and then just know whereabouts of the other things in the periphery.
I feel like you called me out pretty hard on saying if you're not keeping up, it's your own fault. Because it's so true. And that's how I feel about this world of React and these frameworks, because I did step away for a long time and like got stuck in my ways. And it's something that I'm continuing to get better at is just picking it up and trying some projects. And it is like, once you understand how JavaScript works, and then it doesn't take much to go up a level and understand how TypeScript works. Then it doesn't really take that much to understand because all these frameworks are opinionated by nature, right? Like the designers say, this is how you build a proper web app, and the way that you do that for Angular and Vue and React are completely different. That's why they exist as completely different things. So I think that's one thing I've learned is you kind of have to figure out what framework you can kind of warp your worldview to match, and then just live in it and accept take all the trade-offs that you get. There's a lot of benefits to changing your world to match the way those frameworks think, but then you also have to kind of accept the trade-offs and the cons of working with some of those potential frameworks, because otherwise, if you're spending your time battling these frameworks, then you're not really doing yourself any service.
100%. I mean, there's a reason why they're called frameworks, right? Like, by definition, framework is a supporting structure to a building. It's not really the building. The building is the language. The framework is the supporting structure to it. So what's important is the fundamentals of the language, which is JavaScript or TypeScript.
Exactly. So I know you're a mentor and you do a lot of mentoring for aspiring engineers. What inspired you to go help people figure out how to get into this space, or how to help people switch careers within engineering?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. I mean, I read this somewhere, and I think I made this my life mission statement, kind of. I don't remember who said it, but I remember somebody saying that I was born in this world with nothing, but I want to leave behind something positive in my lifetime, something like a legacy. And that kind of struck a chord with me. Why mentorship? I mean, there is nothing more satisfying than changing someone's world and like shaping their life or careers. I don't think anything ever comes closer than that to success, to defining success or happiness. Plus, in addition to mentorship, the reasons are like, I like to gain new perspectives, fresh ideas. That helps me see things differently when I mentor people. It also helps me reinforce my own knowledge and helps me keep relevant with this, like we spoke about, the fast and the ever changing tech world. Also, it helps me broaden my network and it shapes the leaders for tomorrow. It not only shapes my leadership skills or makes me helps me become a better leader. It also helps me shape the leaders of tomorrow, which goes a long way, honestly. Uh, I give a lot of importance to emotional intelligence. That's something I've learned over a period of time, and mentorship is one of the best ways to practice emotional intelligence, I feel. And like I said, last but not the least, I mean, I would say the sense of fulfillment that you get, the sense of growth, it basically allows me to give it back to the community. These are basically, I would say, broadly the reasons why I would like why I got into mentorship. How I was motivated for this was when I was going through my education, looking for a job, growth in the career, switching in the careers. I felt there are a lot of places I learned a lot of things. I made a lot of mistakes. There were things I was not told by anybody. I learned the hard way. And I've always believed you're always allowed to make mistakes. Everybody's allowed to make mistakes. As long as you don't make the same mistake multiple times, you're allowed to make mistakes. But you also don't have a lifespan that's that long enough that you can always make all the mistakes. You potentially have to learn from others' mistakes. I think Jack Ma mentioned this in one of his talks that the greatest way to grow is to learn from others' mistakes, and that's what I try to facilitate other people with when I mentor, where they don't make the same mistakes I did. That kind of speeds up their growth, I feel. So then they're allowed to make other mistakes, which I potentially wasn't even allowed because I made some of the mistakes which they will probably not make because I'm mentoring them.
I think that's one thing I've been thinking about a lot lately is just how the internet, we're still kind of dealing with the, like as a just civilization and as humans, we're still kind of trying to deal with just having the internet, because I think you're right in that we learn best, or we can learn better if we take other people's mistakes and figure out how not to do something. That can help us figure out how the right way to do something is. And we haven't been able to have, like, we've had pockets like within countries, within states and cities and provinces. Like as you shrink it down, you get your localized group of people that you can figure out mistakes from. But now there's a whole world of people that have made mistakes that I wouldn't have even considered making, or even considered that there was a possibility to even make the choice that they made. Because you listen to it on a podcast, or you hear it in a talk going to a conference, or you go on like a TED talk and learn somebody's ideas. And I think that's something like that's kind of bringing it back to mentoring students. It's so cool that we're able to mentor other people in this space, and you kind of get the old man waving at a cloud, or like the grandpa being like, back in my day when I was programming. You get on a soapbox sometimes from time to time, but I think as much as somebody might roll their eyes at a story like that, that those stories are the ones where you can really synthesize what you will out of it. Either be appreciative of now that we have frameworks and things like that people have built, or just learning these simple lessons of how to deal with people and interpersonal skills or whatever. It is really cool that we're able to, as mentors, pass that information on to others and do it at a potentially, even with this podcast, like this is ephemeral. This is going to live for as long as I guess we keep paying the Libsyn bill for hosting the MP3. So there's potentially an unlimited number of people who can listen to this and learn from the mistakes that we've made as developers. And that's just, it's a really cool prospect. And I'm glad you have that perspective on mentoring, because I think a lot of people really do benefit from us having these rambling talks that that we have.
Oh, 100%. I mean, I think you're right with regards to a lot of times when we mention our experiences or even like guide people, it's possible, it's very much possible that people don't probably relate to or resonate with what we're saying. I mean, when I was younger, I mean, not that I'm old, I don't want to say that, but but when I was like I wouldn't say teenager, but like 5-6 years ago, when I would hear somebody say things like what's good for your career and stuff like that, I was like, yeah, you're saying this because you've already achieved it. Yeah, it's all good talk, but it doesn't work in the real world. That's what my attitude was. But then sometimes you learn it the hard way. And then even if once you learn it the hard way, you're like, oh, it's important to listen. There's no harm in listening to somebody, right? You never know when it's going to be helpful. And now when I mentor people, I do get that feeling or vibe from some of them that, oh, yeah, you're talking something that's too ideal, or you're talking something that, oh, I read in a book, but it's very good theoretically, probably not practically. But sometimes it is. I know like 80% of what we read in the books probably doesn't apply to the real world, but the other 20% does, and that's very important. So, yeah, I wouldn't say mentorship is a thankless job. I wouldn't go to that extent, but yeah, there are times where, well, it doesn't go the way you want it to, but that's not what you're in that for, right? You're there to just dissipate your knowledge, and hopefully it's going to help people, and it more often than not it does.
Right. And it's just like, I don't know if you have children or not, but I have two young children, and that's, I mean, mentoring software engineers and parenting, it can really, the corollary there is quite strong. You could tell people time and time again, like, okay, just commit your code often. Like just, it's all those, floss and brush your teeth. It's all these like things that you tell people like, okay, just make sure you do this because you will regret it if you don't. You can yell at people till you're blue in the teeth, and suggest people do it. Maybe not even yelling, but it's one of those things where at some point your advice is going to click for them, and you're just going to be very proud that they figured it out on their own and maybe failed in their own way or whatever. But you at least were there to kind of steer them in the right direction and at least put those things into the back of their mind so that later on, hopefully they apply the lessons learned that you've tried to bestow on them. And that's just how the world goes, right?
That's a great way to put it. I mean, yeah, I don't have kids yet, but I think I can imagine what you really want to say with that thing. That's a very good analogy, to be honest.
So another topic here. So if you don't work in tech every day, and frankly, even if you do, it's hard to know all the tech companies you could work for. And people often want to work for, Google and Facebook and all the big tech companies. But how do you suggest people get familiar with all of the options that exist for working in this giant software industry of ours?
Again, two parts to this question. One, you will never be aware of every company out there except that. And the second thing is think out of the box. Think beyond what's obvious to you. Because what's obvious to you is obvious to 99.9 percentile of the other people. So try to find things that are outside of that. A lot of people who only go for the Googles and the Facebooks and the Amazons, there's nothing wrong about it. I'm not saying there's anything wrong about it. Those are great companies to work for with great products. But having said that, that's not where you want to limit yourself. I mean, let's take Mark43, for example. It's not a company that's small. It's not a company that's not doing cool stuff. In fact, it is a company that's actually making real world difference to our communities on a day-to-day basis. I mean, we build software for public safety, for first responders. We really know that there was a fire that broke out. So like during the forest fires in California, we knew that our software is being used to dispatch units and save lives of like hundreds of people. Now that is immense satisfaction. But a lot of people, like majority of the people probably don't even know what Mark43 does. And I wouldn't blame them for that. But the fact that there are so many companies out there, it's important for you to like check out, like use resources. I mean, there is internet out there. There is no reason for you to say, oh, I could not find information about this. If somebody cannot find information in this world of internet, they probably don't know where and how to find it. Forget where, they don't even know how to find it. So that's a problem with you if you cannot find information. So I would say be more curious, be inquisitive, try to be away from just what the obvious is. Because like I said, what's obvious to you is obvious to the other 99.9 percentile. So if you want to be different, you want to do something out of the box, there are so many companies out there. Also, you need to define what your life goal is. I mean, do you want to build a software that's going to support social media, social networks? Yeah, then that's cool. But do you want to build a software that actually makes difference to the communities in the real world life? Yeah, do that. Do you want to build a software that's going to make manufacturing and supply chain easier? Target companies like that. Do you want to contribute to the food industry? So it also depends on what you want to really contribute your software skills to. Because everywhere you're just going to do potentially the same thing, which is coding. But at the end of the day, what is your software being used for? Does that matter to you? I hope it does, because it should to everybody out there. Your product is what defines your work at the end of the day. Your code is your code is basically the product that's being shipped out. So it's important to define that and then do your due diligence, do the research, get more information.
And it seems like there's a common trope in technology that you can kind of just put in 10 years at a Google or a Facebook or something and make your millions, get your stock options, and then bounce and go do something else. And I think it seems like it's such a disservice. Like you said, there's so, like, with all the smarts that people have out there and with all of the horrible problems that plague other humans, and just our world. And there's an endless supply of problems to solve. And I think figuring out some of those problems that you're passionate about and going and getting embedded in those communities. Like if you're really worried about climate change, for example, there are so many resources out there. And I'm in this Slack group called Climate Action Tech, and they have a jobs page that is just endless with all these startups that are doing things in the climate change, and not just startups, but bigger businesses as well are hiring for people that can solve problems with sustainability and with accountability and all those different things. Like if you're interested in public safety, there's got to be a similar thing that would ultimately lead people to your organization that you can help build software that is going to solve actual problems. And so, yeah, I think to be able to figure out what's all out there, you really have to take an internal look and figure out what's important to you. And it's not always easy to do, but if you can put in that effort to figure out the kind of things that you're passionate about and that you want to spend, part of your career, like let's not fool ourselves. Like you can always change jobs and go find something else. So it's not like if you make a decision today that 5 years from now you can't change it and go find something else. You absolutely can. But the point is, like, just start somewhere and start based off of things that are going to drive you and get that intrinsic motivation instead of just going for the company that's going to offer you a giant check. And, I guess unless that is what you want, is just 5 Ferraris, then go ahead and work at a giant company and work your way up to be making millions of dollars in salary and go from there. But I don't know. I don't think most people operate that way personally.
Exactly. Like you said, like it's very personal. But if somebody says they don't know about it, or there's not enough information about it, or they cannot do it, that's where I have a problem. I'm like, no, that's not true. You're telling yourself a lie, which is prohibiting you from doing it. Or maybe you're trying to cover your tracks and you really don't want to do it. So that's where the problem is. But if you're clear, okay, I want to work for a tech giant, that's what I want to do. Yeah, fair. There is a career path there, which is a very well-defined and a clear path that everybody knows about. So that's perfectly fine. That's your method to madness, right? So again, it's very personal, but there is no way to say that you cannot do it or you don't have enough information or resources to do it in this world right now.
I couldn't agree more. Last question for you. Outside of technical capabilities, there's a lot of intangible traits that make for a successful developer. And we kind of talked about this a little bit before, but what are some traits that you see as most valuable, and how do you think developers can cultivate those traits?
Absolutely. I think you're absolutely right. Even when I'm hiring, right, these days, well, I have really smart people with like crazy technical acumen. How do I differentiate between them? It has to come from these intangible aspects, the skills. I think communication goes a long, long, long way, especially when we work in a team setting. I mean, you can be the best developer out there, best front-end developer out there, but if you don't really communicate well, and because of you, the backend is out of sync, the backend developer doesn't know what's happening. At the end of the day, you can build the best front end, but it's not going to integrate well with the APIs. I'm giving you a very lame and a very, very basic example, but like something as basic as that, there's going to be rework that's required. And that costs the company. You won't be able to deliver something by the deadline within the timeline just because there wasn't enough communication. I think it's very underrated. So communication, I think, goes a long, long way, and it's very important. The other one I think I've learned this the hard way as well. It is patience. Patience, I think, is a virtue that only the greats possess, in software specifically, right? Especially when you're in the management side of things, it's very difficult to convince the stakeholders that software takes time. The amount of time that it takes is real. And the even more difficult to convince them is that if I try to rush this, it's going to slow it down and make it buggy. I've always maintained this, that I read this somewhere, but it was very, very beautifully written. It said, slow is smooth and smooth is fast. So patience will help you move faster, and patience is everything. So that's something very important to learn, whether you're a software developer or and more importantly, if you're a software manager. Sometimes trying to put, like, if your two resources can do something in 6 days, putting 3 won't do it in 2 days. That's something to understand very clearly. It doesn't work that way.
I've always found in the mythical man month where they say you can't take 9 women and make a baby in a month. Like it's this,
yes,
it's the exact same way with software. Like things just take certain amounts of time. And even if you throw more people at the problem, that's not going to necessarily speed things up. In fact, when you throw more people at a problem, then you've got a communication hurdle that you need to work with and make sure that you've got this system moving in sync and lockstep together to be able to achieve certain timelines. So yeah, I couldn't agree more with the patient side of things and communication as well. That's like I think we preach on that on this show so often, but definitely the patience, I'd say. And that's a good lesson if you're listening to this episode as potentially an engineering manager or a hiring manager, that just understanding that software, you can't just snap your fingers and have things done. Like what we do is magic and to a certain degree, but it's not, there's also some roots in physics and practicality that you can't just build everything on a dime.
100%.
Gosh, this was so much fun. I'm really glad that you reached out and asked to be on the show, because I had a tremendous time. How can people get in touch with you and learn more about the work that you're doing just all over the place?
No, absolutely. I think LinkedIn is the best way to get in touch with me. I don't mind sharing my personal email as well with you, which you can put in the description. But I think I would be the most responsive via LinkedIn. I'll share my LinkedIn profile as well. So yeah, I'll be more than happy to help. I'm also on Mentor Cruise and Plato as a mentor. So if you require mentorship, you can just subscribe to me there. They all have like free trials just in case somebody is curious about the pricing and stuff. So you can always have connect with me there. So if you want to just say hi or just connect with me, LinkedIn. But if you want to get real hands-on mentorship, I would say Mentor Cruise, Plato. I'll share all the links with you, Tim, so that the viewers, the audience can actually get access to it. But yeah, so it's LinkedIn and email.
Fantastic. We'll make sure we throw those links in the show notes. And Yash, thank you again for joining me today.
Thank you so much, Tim, for having me. It was a pleasure talking with you, and it was great fun.
Thanks to Yash Khandor for joining me on the podcast today. You can learn more about Yash by connecting with him on LinkedIn or email, and both of those will be linked to in our show notes. Speaking of which, show notes for this episode can be found at constantvariables.co. You can get in touch with us by emailing hello@constantvariables.co. I'm Tim Bornholt on Twitter. The show is CV_podcast. Today's episode was produced by Jenny Karkowski and was edited by the great Jordan Doust. If you loved this episode and could spare just 1 minute of your time, we'd love it if you left us a review on the Apple Podcasts app. Just head to constantvariables.co/review and we'll get you to the right place. This episode was brought to you by the Jed Mahonis Group. If you're looking for a technical team who can help make sense of mobile software development, give us a shout at jmg.mn.